my daughter, Mikel McCoy, is going to share her story with us. This is the first time this story has been shared. The book that you read during this study, we were in the midst of living this part of life. And so she's going to be sharing it. The reason y'all have tissue on your tables is you're going to need it. And this is going to be a very raw and very real. She's genuinely giving us quite a gift in choosing to share this with us, and you'll hear that as she shares her story. But I want to pray for her and for Gabriella as we get started, and for each of you, that you'll know how to manage the gift of being the recipient of this story, who it needs to be shared with, who it doesn't, and that kind of thing. So, Father, I just thank you so much for these women, for this opportunity to come together and what you've done with us this whole fall season and how sweet our time has been. I thank you for every single woman who's been brave to sit in front of that camera and give us a story, even our friend from Texas who gave us the audio version of her story. And Lord, I just thank you for Mikel, and I pray that you would just give her peace in her heart and clarity in her mind as she shares what you've given her to share, and as she really just opens her heart wide to us and shares how her walk and how you walked with her along the way. Lord, we also want to lift up Gabriella, God, to you and just invite you to bring healing and wholeness to her body through this journey of recovering from this injury, that you would just allow her to be as pain-free as she possibly can. And Lord, just reach from heaven and do the miraculous in her to make her whole again. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Hello. Hello. I don't do public speaking well, even surprising with both my parents, so I actually wrote this out today. I had decided that I was putting a job opportunity in order to write my testimony and give my testimony. For my mom, I said if I get this job, I will share my story. I didn't get the job. I didn't get the job. I never heard that from them. No. We'll have to enunciate. So I wrote it, and I'm gonna feel most comfortable just reading it. I have tissues because even when I started writing it this morning at 8 a.m., I shared like the first 3 paragraphs with my mom and started crying. So very shaky, but bear with me. So I titled my testimony, Hindsight is 2020, but God never fails. That's what I said when I got baptized on Sunday. So over 13 years ago, I met my kid's father. We were 14 and 15, and ironically, it was at church during youth group on a Wednesday night. Another reason that amplifies that church is the people and not the building, because everything at the church building is not necessarily good. During high school, I had an ongoing battle with my parents about the friends I kept, the school I went to, and the boy I dated. It was all rooted in me feeling that I was not heard, and that my parents feeling that they were doing the best they knew how at the time. My frustration of not being heard and the attempts of my parents' control over my life decisions and the pressure of being a pastor's daughter of a prominent church where everyone knew my name led to some poor decisions in high school. I felt what I said or felt or was doing didn't matter. What mattered was that what the pastor and his wife wanted. It led me to act out. I was drinking at a young age. I was lying about where I was staying the night, and other actions that led to me becoming pregnant 3 days before my high school graduation. Yes, with that same boy I met at church 4 years before. I was in love, he was the one, and at 18 I knew everything, and no one was going to stop me. My relationship with my parents became especially strained my senior year in high school. I started feeling cornered, like I had to go to colleges that my father knew the headmaster at. I often heard my father say I needed to leave my friends and my life in that small town Christian school, especially that boy that was not worthy of me. They weren't hearing me when I kept saying, wait until I graduate, I'm moving out. So I became compliant outwardly. I would respond just okay. I went to the college visits they wanted me to, and I behaved at home and just kept what I did in my time away from home even more private. I initially started counting down the days. My boyfriend had started looking for apartments, ones that he and I would move into. After graduation, I did just that. I moved out when my siblings left for camp and my parents went out of town. I was done with the control, quotation marks. I was 18, a high school graduate, and I was an adult. Remember, I knew everything. That backfired on me in so many ways. The church that I grew up in was running almost 1,500 people, was told in the pulpit by my parents that I had run away with my boyfriend. The Facebook message from caring church members telling me how much I had messed up and that they were telling me out of love totally showed me the side of the church I always felt was there and the pressure of being a pastor's kid. Staff members were randomly showing up to my apartment, asking to talk to me, and I would literally hide in my bedroom every time there was a knock on the door to get away from all that love, which in all honesty just felt like judgment. My boyfriend would simply tell them I didn't want to talk to them and turn them away. My parents showed up with 2 male staff members to force me home. I wouldn't even look at my mom and dad. My boyfriend simply told them if she wants to go, she can. If she doesn't, I'm not kicking her out. I had tried to talk to my parents for what felt like years, and now all of a sudden, when I pulled a drastic move, they finally wanted to listen. I wasn't having anything of it. There was one staff member that showed up to my place, to the place my boyfriend worked, and I would hang out, not to my home. She asked me just to go to Sonic with her. She told me a story about her unplanned pregnancy and marriage to a man out of haste. She asked me if I was pregnant. I told her immediately I wasn't, that I didn't move out because I got pregnant, but because I was tired of being manipulated and not heard and constantly told where I would go to college and who I could remain friends with. She just said okay and took me back to the place my boyfriend worked after we finished eating. She texted me later for my address and said that she had something for me and wanted to leave it at my door. When I got back to the apartment that day, she had bought me a pregnancy test. I started doing the math, the one where you count the weeks since your last period, and I was late. Not by a little, but by 2 weeks. I took the test that night, and it was positive instantly. I was 18, and my boyfriend was 19, and we were expecting our first baby. It was 2010. Side note, the only person in that church that treated me with the love and respect that I desperately needed was that staff member. She wasn't coming to tell me how disappointed my parents were, nor how much God's heart was breaking because of my choices. She just cared enough to share her story and prompt a test that I needed to take. That was God in that moment. This led to an internal battle of being in love with the father of my baby and wanting my parents involved and to just love me and pay for a dream wedding. None of that happened. My father and my relationship took a drastic hit. We were best buds growing up until high school and a boy. Sports was our thing. No bat too expensive, no morning too early to get up and run with me, no practice or game too far for him not to be there any and every minute that he could. I had hurt him the deepest. I disappointed him so much, and I had ruined my mother's perfect picture of what she had dreamed my life would be like when she was rocking me to sleep in her arms 18 years earlier. I felt defeated and alone, and it was all my fault. Anytime I tried to explain my decisions, I was called selfish and told that I didn't think about what it was doing to my family. I was told by family I would cause my mother's cancer to return. I was asked by a sibling if I had even thought about our family's reputation. I was told by a parent before giving birth that I should have used a condom. We were all operating out of fear and hurt, much like our world is today. The only person to congratulate me genuinely was my aunt when I told her at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. I went to college that first semester online. I was offered family housing where I initially was offered a $21,000 scholarship and refused. My boyfriend was more important to me. I gained 75 pounds that pregnancy due to depression, that has blocked a lot out of my mind of that time to this day. The things I remember were how I felt people were nosy and just trying to get the next piece of gossip. How people who had left my father's church over the years would come get me, take me to lunch, and then to church with them. To different churches, not this one. How my family was so torn and how I was constantly reminded of how I messed up. I think in high school I had something like 1,200 friends on Facebook. In a matter of weeks of it becoming public that I was pregnant, I had 80. I had 30 plus unread messages from people I didn't even know. People showed up to my apartment that I didn't truly know, and everyone was standing up for my parents. They thought they were helping me, but I felt alone. No one was standing up for me. Fast forward to my oldest birth. It was traumatic. It's February 9th, 2011, 36 hours of labor, a C-section that I wouldn't stop bleeding in, and a 10-pound, 2-ounce baby. A boyfriend, the father of my child, that couldn't stand to see what my family and their church had done to me. He blamed them for my depression, my weight gain, my tears at night, and my pain. He didn't grow up like I did. We were forced into moving out of our apartment only 3 weeks after my daughter's birth. We could go to either parents, both had offered, his and mine, but my parents wouldn't let us share a room unless we were married. I knew how uncomfortable my boyfriend would be in my parents' home, so I chose his. I had agreed to cut my family out of my life after we got married a week before my 19th birthday with a 4-week baby, March 4th, 2011. He was mad that they wouldn't pay for the wedding I wanted, among other things. He was joining the Army, and he got a shipping date of September. It was only March. By May, I had already seen my family behind his back often. I moved out of his parents' home because his mother and I did not get along. When my new husband and I would fight, she would always intervene, and it was always my fault. She intervened one too many times. She came into our room. We were given one of the rooms in her 3-bedroom home with a large bonus room, so I guess 4 bedrooms. But it wasn't even the bonus room. Still a little bit over that. And demanded the baby. Just like that, she said, "Give me the baby." I laughed. I looked at my husband and said, "We're leaving. I can't do this anymore. Please come with us." He just stared at me. I threw my things in a bag, looked at his mom, and told him I'm leaving her, and because of her, and that I was not leaving my husband. He didn't say a word as me and our daughter left. His brother messaged me on Facebook, called me all sorts of obscene names because I had left his brother with our baby, and how dare I yell at their mom. I had to explain to him that not once did I leave my husband, just his mother who was toxic, once again operating out of her own pain and fear. I moved into a basement apartment that didn't have a kitchen, but I had a toaster oven, a microwave, and a griddle. I was determined to make it work. In June, my husband quit his job with his dad and moved in with me. I was nannying about 40 minutes away to make money before he left for the Army, and he would stay with our daughter and play Xbox all day. We sold his car and used that money to take one last vacation before he left for basic training. On vacation, he found out that I had been taking Misty, our oldest, to see my family. There were pictures of my sister's high school graduation on my camera with Misty there. He was livid. We were in Florida, and it was the last day. He didn't talk to me for 3 hours. We were halfway home, and I decided to stand up for my family for the first time. Normally, I was only standing up for him. I looked over at him, and I said, "My family is involved, or we aren't married." That simple, and I let it go. I begged God to change my husband's heart. He finally responded 45 minutes later after not talking to me and said, "Okay." He said, "Don't leave, and they can see her." He wanted me to stay. It was my little win after everything I had been through. This was July 2011. I was 19 and he was 20. My husband left on my mother's birthday that year for basic training. He had joined as an 18X candidate, which is fast-tracked for the Green Berets in the Army, September 11, 2011. I wrote him every day, 3 to 5 letters a day. He called maybe 3 times in 3 months. I joined a Facebook group with other wives and girlfriends with husbands or boyfriends in the same group as my husband. He would go to church just so they could take his picture and be posted on Facebook so that I could see him. Misty and I got to see him for 48 hours at the end of November after Thanksgiving. Things were good, it was easy, but he was also gone. We went from September 2011 to the end of November 2011 before seeing each other in person. And since he and I had started dating in 2009, he and I had never gone more than a couple of days without seeing each other or talking to each other. It was a hard change. He came home for Christmas that year and we spent it with his family because his mother's master manipulation. He promised we would spend every other Christmas with my family. Little did he know he would be deployed the next Christmas, conveniently for him. He graduated basic and moved on to airborne training. Basic training had been great for him. He was kind and respectful. He talked to my parents and didn't ignore them. I thought things were going to be so much better. He decided to drop out of the 18X candidate training right before selection after airborne school. Selection is the first initial training of special forces that you have to pass. We were stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, right in Clarksville. He joined the Army to be sent home. I was devastated. I wanted to travel the world. Side note, this was God during this time and I didn't know it. If I had not been close to home, it would have been harder for my family to help me through the years to come. My husband was attached to an infantry unit, the grunt of the Army. If you don't know this is the soldier banging down the doors overseas or in convoys that get blown up by car bombs. This job you do not have to be very smart for and offers no job experience for a resume after the Army. I was upset because I told him when he joined he wouldn't finish. Not because he couldn't, but because he would choose not to. We had a nice 3-bed, 2-bath home. I was 20 and he was 21. We had a 1-year-old daughter. It was May 2012. During all of this, my mother's cancer did return. I felt some guilt about this. It showed up in her liver, and in June 2012, she would have surgery to remove part of her liver. In June, we were also told that my husband's unit was on the deployment list for that coming fall. The whole month of July, my husband was gone for JRTC training. It's a pre-deployment training. My mom was recovering from major liver surgery, and I had a 1-year-old. My husband was distant. He started going out with his buddies to bars when he got home and would come back at 3 a.m. or later, often drunk, and he would never invite me because I was only 20 and not old enough to go into the bars. I noticed that fall that we started fighting more. I attended a spouse briefing for how soldiers act at home before leaving overseas. There would be another meeting before he returned. They told me and other wives it was normal for the soldiers to distance themselves before leaving, to get in the zone and mindset. They said it was normal for them to act out or start being a loner at home. They needed to focus on the mission. When my husband finally left on deployment for Afghanistan in November 2012, I was eerily calm. I wouldn't learn until later why. The night he was on a plane to fly to Afghanistan, I took another pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant with our second baby. I was happy, even in the midst of him leaving. A few days after he left, I got a bad feeling, and I hacked or logged into his email and found messages between him and other women that had started in the summer of 2012. You see, all those nights he didn't invite me wasn't just because I was too young to get into a bar, but that he couldn't act single with his wife present. I was devastated. I was 20 with a 1-year-old, an Army wife of a soldier who had just deployed and pregnant with his baby, and he was cheating on me. It was November 2012. I sent him a long text explaining that I knew everything, that whenever he got this, not to bother talking to me. You see, we had been fighting before he deployed, loud, ugly fights, because he locked me out of his phone and I accused him of hiding something. When he finally had service on his cell phone from Afghanistan, he called me. His first words were, "I don't care how much this call cost. I have to know I still have my wife and daughter." I was under his spell. With a few words and promises, I forgave him. He gave me the passwords to everything. We joined Facebook, and he deleted his. He was so excited about the new baby. I got this call at church. Side note, this was God. God's always there. This time he was quite literally behind me while on this phone call. I became really ill with this new pregnancy. I was also packing up our house to save money and live with my parents during my husband's deployment. My mother was doing chemo after her surgery, and between the two of us, we weren't that great at packing. My younger brother and his friend came up to help us move the heavy things, and I moved into the house with my parents and my younger brother. My sister was in college and my brother was in his senior year of high school. My husband and I Skyped often, texted daily, and I found a plan through AT&T that covered some way in a foreign country. On December 27, 2012, I was bleeding. It's my husband's birthday. My mom is sick with chemo, and my husband is thousands of miles away, and I'm bleeding. My mother's friend took me to the doctor's office where an ultrasound tech performed an ultrasound. I was supposed to be 8 weeks pregnant. The ultrasound tech can't say anything, but this isn't my first pregnancy, and what I was looking at was only a jelly bean. By 8 weeks, I should be seeing more of an alien. I had an ultrasound around the same time with my oldest, and I was miscarrying. I called my husband and told him. He told his chain of command, and he was going to be granted 2 weeks leave. They were going to fly him home in 2 days. Later, he was pulled off the bird helicopter because my baby wasn't 20 weeks. You see, the Army only sees it as a death in the family if the fetus is 20 weeks or older. Side note, this was God. He knew that I did not need to see my husband during this time, and that it would have tied my bond to him even stronger and harder to leave. You see, what I found out later through therapy in 2016 was that one particular fight that happened a few days before my husband deployed. I caught him hiding things on his phone, and I went to our daughter's room and started packing. I had Misty in my arms and a suitcase in the other hand, and trying to leave the room, he kicked me in my stomach. That same day, he said, "Well, if you're pregnant, you aren't pregnant now." This was before I knew I was pregnant. This same day, he also sat on a couch holding our friend's pistol, and I'm begging him not to kill himself on my knees. Another form of abuse. Our friend lived on post and needed a place to keep his gun. This was all physical, mental, and emotional abuse, all in the fall of 2012, when initially I thought the abuse didn't start until he returned from Afghanistan. Come back till I'm suffering a miscarriage and my husband can't come home. My mom is sick with chemo. I'm alone again. My thoughts raced to the cheating that had happened before deployment. I was why he cheated. I wasn't pretty. I had gained so much weight while pregnant with our oldest, but I was determined. When my husband deployed in November 2012, I weighed 220 pounds. When he returned in September 2013, I was 162 pounds. I had worked hard. When he returned, it was like the honeymoon phase all over again. I felt pretty again, and we were a family again. The warnings of the Army meeting before their return were in the back of my mind. You see, when soldiers return, they seem perfectly fine for the first 30 to 60 days. My husband and I had wanted to replace what we had lost. We were trying for another baby, but he was drinking heavily, but things were still okay. By the end of October 2013, I had gained back about 20 pounds of what I had lost. My husband and my fights were getting worse. Each time an abuser passes one line, they pass another. I had become addicted to the abuser-victim cycle. What you might not know about physical abuse is it becomes addicting to both parties. The victim begins to push the buttons of the abuser because they know how sorry the abuser will be and how sweet they will become after. I started pushing my husband further and further. I used to push Misty into her room so she wouldn't see it. I would run into my neighbor's house to hide. One particular time was so bad, I went home for a weekend. My dad was mad when he heard I was talking to my mom about having a baby. He told me I was home with them in a fight with my husband, yet I wanted to have his baby. It didn't make sense to him. When I went back to my husband, he agreed to go to therapy. But in the Army, you can't be honest. It'll affect your career. He can tell them he got angry, but he couldn't tell them he got so angry he would choke his wife and throw her to the ground and kick her. They prescribed pills for his anger. I started having anxiety attacks, and rightly so. My body and mind were being manipulated. My husband was telling me things that he would do weren't actually happening, and I started giving in to him. If he wanted sex, we had it. If he wanted to go out and we had barely any money, I made it work. My friend who had trouble with anxiety recommended I go to a doctor and ask for meds, that it would help me feel better. And it did for a time. I was in a daze, calm, cool, collected, nothing fazed me, no reactions. In January 2014, I got pregnant again. I was ecstatic. I could finally fill the hole that my miscarriage had caused. My doctor didn't approve the meds. Side note, this was God. My youngest saved me. She saved my life. She gave me the strength to leave for the first time. The abuse tapered off some, still yelled and berated me, but nothing too bad. We went to the beach that spring break with one of his soldier friends and his soldier friend's family. They had 2 girls just slightly older than Misty. I had another bad feeling about my husband that week. I got onto his phone and found that he was trying to meet up with girls in Florida. He had a dating app, telling these girls he was separated and a single father. That part is comical. Raising our daughter had always been completely up to me. I took pictures of it all, sent it to my phone. At 4 a.m., I went and sat on the beach. I listened to the waves and the quiet in the dark. I sat there until sunrise at 6 a.m. I was angry at God. If he could make a donkey speak, why couldn't he change my husband? I wasn't thinking about free will, just the perfect picture of my life that I wanted. I went upstairs, took my debit card and Misty, and we went shopping. My husband wasn't awake yet. We bought a little stuffed husky that Misty still has to this day. She doesn't know the memories it brings up from me seeing it. He woke up, called me, and told me to come back to the condo. I was scared. I knew he would take my debit card, so I went to the ATM and got $200 cash out. I shoved it in my bra. Misty and I ran into his friend downstairs by the pool. I begged him to come upstairs with me. He said no. I told him if he didn't follow me, my husband would kill me. When I got into the condo, my husband was furious. He asked for my phone so he could delete the evidence. See, in the Army, infidelity is still illegal. I said no. What he didn't know is I emailed it to myself, so even if he deleted it off my phone, I still would have it. He grabbed a knife out of the kitchen and held it to my throat. His eyes were empty of all feeling. I begged Misty to go into the bedroom and close the door. I gave him my phone. His friend and his friend's family walked in with my husband's hand holding a knife to my throat and my back against the couch. His friend did nothing. My husband grabbed me by the hair and dragged me to the bedroom 20 feet away that Misty was hiding in. I shoved her out and locked the door. He slapped me. This was the first and only time he hit me. I often tell people I could write a book titled, "But He Never Hit Me." He did take my debit card, threatened my life, and told me how I would act the rest of the trip. We had 2 days. The cops were never called, and everyone acted like nothing had happened. We got home, and the next morning he came up to me while I was sitting on the couch, and he said, "You're leaving me, aren't you?" I told him yes, that Misty and I would be moving to my parents for now. He needed help, and I didn't feel safe. Step 1 for healing had started April 2014. I did end up telling his command in June 2014 because of threatening language he was using in text and how he wouldn't give me more than $100 a month for my expenses. Mind you, he was making $1,200 a month just being married to me. That was the Army pay. I went to the doctor alone with my mom for this new baby, and my husband and I would trade off weekends with Misty. I was about 30 weeks pregnant at that time. July 2014 with a 3-year-old. And we were meeting her dad at a Burger King parking lot in Columbia. We had been fighting, and he was livid, but it was weird. He was smiling, almost evil-like, when swapping our daughter and putting her in his truck. After she was closed in his truck, he turned to me and threatened to have me killed. He acted as if it was nothing to him. I told him he couldn't have Misty if he did that, and he asked me what I was going to do about it. I told him I would call 911. He tried to grab my phone, and he grabbed my wrist and shoved me, 8 months pregnant, into my car. But he suddenly stopped and handed me my phone back. Side note 6, God again. I don't know what he saw, but somehow my husband stopped and gave me my phone. I put my phone on record and goaded him into telling me what he had just said and what he had just done. Remember, I had spent 3 months away from him. I was healing and getting stronger. He admitted everything and yelled at me some more. A police officer drove up. At this time, he was standing between me and his truck, my husband, that held Misty. And I was in between my door and the seat, putting a barrier between my husband and myself. The officer asked if everything was okay, and of course my husband said, "There's nothing going on here." The officer looked in my direction, and while my husband stared at the officer, I shook my head no. Another thing in defiance of my husband. Side note, there's God again. I didn't call 911 on my phone. Someone else did. The officer called for backup and asked my husband to step around to the other side of his truck and talk to him. When the other officer came, the original one walked up to me and asked if I was okay. I told him about what happened, how my husband threatened my life, grabbed my phone, my wrist, and my 3-year-old daughter was still in his truck. I also told him about the recording. He told me I could get Misty out of the truck, and I did, texted my parents. The officer walked up to me and told me that they were arresting my husband, that I didn't have to press charges. The state was. Side note, God was right there and took the pressure off me so that I wouldn't feel guilt over putting my husband in jail. My husband's mom and his family showed up. They were weepy and begging to hold Misty. I think they believed they would never see her again. My parents came. After they took my husband away, the officer came back up to me. I tried to send the recording, but it wouldn't. He took a picture of my wrist, and I asked him why. I'd never bruised that easily when my husband had grabbed me before. To be honest, I don't remember ever seeing bruises on my body. The officer responded with, "This is what I see," and turned the camera to show me. I was shocked. How cruel of the tricks my mind had played on me, how twisted up my husband's reality had forced on me then for me to believe the lies that he didn't hurt me. There on my wrist was a perfect handprint of my husband's hand in a bruise. God showed me that bruise. That's my next side note. The officer then asked if he could record from my phone on his because I couldn't send it. I said yes, but to do it in his vehicle. I didn't want to listen to it again. While he did that, he asked me for my written statement of what had happened. My mom and dad were there by now. When the recording was over, the officer came out and said, "I can't believe he said those things to you. It's awful." I still have that recording on that phone. And so does my divorce and custody attorney. We were fearful of a retaliation after my husband's arrest. That Sunday, we all had bodyguards, and my husband's picture was with the security team, along with his brothers. His brother had a history in jail, too. Everyone knew my mess. Women in church would walk up to me and ask what they could pray for specifically over me. It felt as if I was the pregnant, unwed preacher's daughter all over again. People would ask if my husband was deployed again or in training. This time I wasn't the pregnant teenage pastor's daughter. I was the abused Army wife, single mom, pregnant pastor's daughter getting a divorce. If there is a label, I had it. My attorney insisted that I file for an order of protection. I also called the Army and told them what happened. My husband's command yelled at me because we were supposed to be separated. It was my fault again. We went to court and I won the order of protection and we figured out visitation. I would now be meeting his mother and she would take the kids to see him. He only got to see my unborn daughter on Sunday afternoons for as long as I nursed. We used everything to our advantage in these situations. My attorney assured me it was justified. I got it in my head that regardless of what happened, my husband should be there for the birth of his daughter. I went to court to amend it at 38 weeks pregnant. I was amending the order of protection. At 40 weeks pregnant, I had a hearing for my husband's domestic assault charge, a month after the incident. He was nowhere in sight. When his name was called, his supposed attorney stood up and said that we had agreed to extend it because I was due to give birth any day. I stood up in a full courtroom and said we did no such thing. The judge asked me to come forward. You can imagine the gasps and whispers and, "Oh, that poor girl," when I waddled my 4-week pregnant butt up to the front. Once again, more guilt. I told the judge we had never agreed to that and that I was here for this hearing. The judge felt bad for me, but given my husband was 2 hours away at Fort Campbell, he pushed it to January 2015. Side note, God was right there, and I'll tell you why soon. As I left the courtroom, people told me to stand strong, don't give in. Even strangers wanted to fight for me after hearing. A week later, I gave birth to our youngest, River, and because of that move in court, I didn't allow my husband in the room, though I did allow him in the hospital to meet his daughter. It rekindled a lot of emotions. Birth and hormones are a powerful thing. You feel tied to each other and forget all the bad. This started for us to sneak behind the order of protection that I had in place. When River was about 2 months old, I wanted to drop the order of protection. My husband was saying he would drop his complaint for divorce if I dropped the order of protection. And my attorney was telling me that we could drop it as soon as they agreed to drop the complaint for divorce. I caved first, though. This started a weird dynamic between him and me. We were sort of dating again, but I knew he was dating other girls. In January 2015, we finally had that court hearing. My husband was on his 4th year of a 6-year enlistment with the Army. He wanted out. I wanted to drop the charges so he could stay in. Instead, he took the DA's deal for 1 year of good behavior, then expungement from his record. Take note of this. Revenge is mine, declares the Lord. At least I think that's how it goes. We continued to hang out and spend time together. He eventually chose me and wanted to move in with me and the girls. My parents had purchased a home for me and completely remodeled it. My dad said my husband wasn't welcome there unless he apologized to my father. My husband had apologized to me and thought that was enough. We decided to move out. I was supporting us as my husband didn't have a job. I was now driving 1 hour and 15 minutes one way to work. Remember, I was healing. I had now spent over a year from him. I was confident, had a job, and he was being kicked out of the Army in an other than honorable discharge. Because when you have a domestic violence charge, you can no longer handle, own, nor purchase a firearm. I would not add him to my bank account and told him that. But from the Army, they determined he was 50% disabled from his psych evaluation and his knee he hurt jumping out of a plane. He set it up to go into my account. He finally got a job, and that is when things went downhill. He started getting more distant, not coming home right after work, hiding things on his phone, and I told him when we got back together it was his last chance. I wrecked my car on the way to work one day and it was totaled. Side note, watch God again, just wait. I was now driving a borrowed car from my parents. My husband started drinking heavily again. I knew he was cheating, so I told him let's be in an open marriage. I was just trying to figure out how to get custody of my kids at this point. I went to pick up my daughters from the friend that kept them while we worked. She's also the same friend who told me about the meds. I told her my suspicions after he didn't return one day until noon the next day. And she said, you know now the abuse means nothing because you took him back. He will get 50-50 custody. I told her I knew that and didn't know what to do. I texted him that day not to come home until I left for work in the morning. I was done because I knew he was cheating. He worked second shift, 2 to 10. I woke up around midnight to him crashing bottles in the kitchen. I fell back asleep. I then woke up to him shifting me around looking for my phone underneath me. He was accusing me of cheating when he was the one that had been cheating the entire time. He then choked me until the room started getting black. He punched the air mattress that I was on and it popped. He then kept me from leaving the room by throwing me back and then shoving me down the hall, kicking me in the ribs and gut. He threw my phone up against the wall and grabbed my debit card and left. My girls were asleep. I looked at my phone and it was broken. I went outside, knocked on our neighbor's door. They didn't come. Some boys from above us were smoking and asked what all the commotion was. I asked to borrow their phone and if they ever hear anything like that again to call the police. I called 911. For the first time in 3 years of my physical, mental, and emotional abuse, I called 911 on my own. I told them what happened, what car he drove, and what he was wearing. I then texted that same friend who watched my kids, and she came to sit with me. She stayed after the cops left taking my statement, and then left about an hour later. My husband came back about 5 a.m. He was in defeated mode. This is normal of an abuser. They get angry, cool off, and then are remorseful. He came in the house and asked if he was getting arrested. I told him yes, and that he was welcome to kiss his kids goodbye and to give me his phone because he broke mine. He gave me his phone but refused to kiss the girls. It is the middle of the night. But I called 911 and told them he came back, but I was safe. Between the time the police arrived and the time I called, my husband threatened to kill himself. And I said, okay. I was done. He then asked me how hard it would be for him to get shot by the police. I shrugged my shoulders again and said, not hard. He had no power of manipulation over me any longer, and he was just figuring it out. Right before the cops came, he told me, I really did love you. My only response was, you do not know the meaning of the word. I knew it deep down there was no coming back from this together. It was over. I was 23. I had known him 9 years. It was October 2015. Side note, without this attack, I would not get majority custody of my kids. God allowed it to happen. I texted my father that I was safe and he was in jail and that I was coming home. When my dad could have told me, I told you so, or been snarky about it, all he said was, are you okay? I love you. Do you need me to get a U-Haul? Side note, that was God. I finally had a response from my father that I actually needed. Thankfully, all my stuff was still in storage except the bare minimum, and I did go home. The next day, I filed for divorce and an additional order of protection. Remember that car I wrecked? That money paid for my divorce attorney and his retainer. God works in mysterious ways. He spent 2 weeks in jail that time. Apparently, his parents' bail money was only a one-time thing. I used his deposit from the Army to pay the next month's rent, and we went to court for his hearing. I told the Montgomery County DA that he had a pending case in Murray County. He told me that my husband told him that it was dismissed in September. Remember, we had court September and pushed to January. What my husband didn't think about was that he didn't show up for the first court hearing in September 2014, pushed to January 2015, and that the year of being good started January of 2015, not September 2014. Revenge is mine, declares the Lord. The Montgomery County DA called down to Murray County and strapped my husband with a year of probation, no chance of it being off his record. The Murray County DA then picked up the case at my request, reheard it, and hit him with an additional year of probation and no chance of it being removed from his record. My husband, during our divorce and custody battle, was now convicted of 2 domestic assault charges in the state of Tennessee. Side note, God never fails and cares for you. In December, we heard the order of protection and visitation and child support in court. I said my experience in front of the judge in an empty courtroom. Just my attorney, my brother, the bailiff, my husband, his attorney, court reporter, and judge. Side note, God knows I have a fear of public speaking. He emptied that courtroom for me. After my testimony, my husband took a stand. His attorney allowed him to share his version of the story. She did not know him very well. He proceeded to tell the judge that the last encounter, I bounced off of him down the hall, and he was just standing his ground. The judge then paused his testimony and asked, you were standing your ground against your soon-to-be former wife? Just to clarify. My husband told him, yes, sir, I stood my ground. The judge then went on to ask my husband if he would stand his ground against a man. My husband answered, well, it would depend on the man, sir. Poetic justice. My husband just admitted how much of a coward he was in court. The bailiff and my brother were laughing. The judge rolled his eyes and said he didn't need to hear anything else, and that the only reason he was granting my husband any visitation at all was for our kids. He granted my husband every other Saturday noon to Sunday 6 p.m. supervised by his parents. He was also ordered to pay child support even though he wasn't employed. It's based off your ability to earn in the state of Tennessee. Fast forward to June 2016. I found out my husband was not coming for visitation the past 6 months, and he had never paid child support. We went to court on contempt charges. The one time he did pay child support, his check bounced, costing my mom quite a bit of money helping me out. This was the first court hearing that I allowed a parent to come. My mom was there, and my husband was going to jail most likely for not paying child support, and she wanted to see him get arrested. He was refusing to negotiate with our divorce because he was insisting on 50-50 custody. We weren't going to be able to go before a judge until December 2016 for a divorce hearing. When we arrived at the courthouse, my attorney told me that my husband's attorney was going to ask the judge for a release from her contract because my husband wouldn't listen and wasn't paying her. Didn't surprise me. He never listens. And obviously wasn't paying me, and that's why we were there to begin with. My husband had no clue. When our case was called, my husband's attorney walked up to the judge and he granted her release from contract. My husband's face was priceless. Side note, this was God moving. My husband then walked up to my attorney and said he wanted a divorce. My attorney had a no crap Sherlock moment with him, in other words, and came to talk to me and my mom. My husband had agreed to come to my attorney's office and work out the divorce. I was shocked. I asked my attorney what that meant and hopeful that I could get divorced within a month or so. And he said, but my attorney said, you can be divorced by the end of the day. Let's go before he changes his mind. There is a picture my mom took of me signing my divorce paperwork. I should have provided that. It's on my Instagram. You could probably find it. The wait of literally 10 years was finally done. I don't think I've ever looked happier signing that paperwork. We ended that day with a judge's signature on my divorce paper, June 13, 2016. I then took the title proudly, divorced. I was now officially a McCoy again. I was 24, had a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old, but I was free. Over the years, my ex-husband and I have been in court 8 times. All 8 times I have been victorious. I've never been beaten in court. Satan has attacked me with guilt, shame, and even through members of the church. It has taken a long time for me to heal, and I still have healing to go. Over the years of being free from an abusive relationship has taught me the following and more. Number 1, God shows love. When a staff member shows love and shares her story and buys you a pregnancy test, even though you aren't pregnant, in the midst of all those who cause you guilt. Number 2, God keeps you close to those who love you and will fight for you. My ex-husband was stationed at Fort Campbell. My parents were an hour away. Number 3, God is present during difficult conversations to give peace. My ex-husband calling while he was deployed about his infidelity, and I was on church property. Number 4, God creates safety in the time of heartache. My ex-husband wasn't allowed home during my miscarriage. Number 5, God gives strength in the way we receive it. He let me become pregnant with River because he knew my love for my unborn child would push me to make the tough decision to protect me and Misty by leaving. 6 and 7, God puts protection over you. My ex-husband didn't break my phone and handed it back to me in that parking lot so that I could record him admitting his abuse and threats. God also put someone out there to call 911 to save me from worse fates and for my ex-husband's first arrest. Number 8, God carries our burdens. God took the burden and guilt from me when the police officer told me he was pressing charges against my ex-husband and that I was just a witness. Number 9, God brings light to the dark. God showed me the bruise that the officer and other people could see because I was blinded by the lies I was fed by my ex-husband about the abuse. Number 10, God's timing is perfect. He allowed the first conviction of domestic assault hearing when I was 40 weeks pregnant to be pushed by 4 months because he knew I would need that second conviction to solidify my custody case and protect my kids. Number 11, God works all things for good. If I had not wrecked my car, I would not have had the money to pay for my divorce attorney's retainer nor my kids' Christmas that year. And number 12, God allows bad things to happen to us for a better future. If I had not been attacked by my ex-husband on October 22nd, 2015, I would not have had majority custody of my kids with all decision-making rights. He gets 38 days a year on paper to this day. Number 13, God is just. He made it where my ex-husband would have 2 convictions of domestic assault and lose the ability to be with his kids for more than 2 nights at a time unsupervised. Number 14, God moves for our benefit. My ex-husband's attorney quitting gave my ex-husband a reality check that allowed me to be divorced in a day, 8 months after I filed for divorce, but 6 months before an availability for divorce hearing in front of a judge. This last Sunday, there it is. But before that, with baptism, this last Sunday I chose last minute to be baptized with my 2 daughters, Misty and River. They are 10 and 7 now. I'm alive because of God's love. I am forgiven because of God's grace. And in Christ, I have found that I am not defined by these labels: pregnant teenager, unwed mother, pastor's daughter, army wife, abused wife, single mom, divorced woman. I have been all those women, and I'm sure more, but they do not define me. Christ defines me and says that I am strong in him. I am worthy because he loves me, and I am capable because he will never fail me. He will chase after me no matter how far I run, and hindsight is 20/20. I also added my life verse that's been prayed over me probably since before I was 16, but Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight.